Hello guys and welcome back to CT10. My name is Arnie and on today's episode, I'm joined by Maddie, who was the Renton winner in the 2025 first sitting. We're less than a week out from the current sitting, and I know that the people sitting next week are in one of the most nerve-wracking times when it comes to the exam period. I asked Maddie to join me for this episode specifically for this reason. Firstly, to share her insight in what she did leading up to the Viva day, and then secondly, we're going to go through some of the opening Viva stems from her exam in the 2025 first sitting. This is a really kind and generous thing Maddie has offered to do, as she's voluntarily going through this exercise upon my request. And for that, I really want to thank Maddie in advance. We've divided this episode into 4 sections, and the reason I've made this episode is because I think opening Viva stems are the fine balance between saying the right amount of information, making sure you set the tone for the rest of the 300 seconds where you're going to be grilled on that topic, as well as making yourself feel comfortable in that opening 10 to 15 seconds. I don't want you guys to come out of this and feel like you need to replicate exactly what Maddie is saying. This is more so an example to get you guys in the right headspace and think about why she's answering the questions the way she is, not specifically remembering exactly what she's saying word for word. So I hope that's what you guys get out of it. In the first part, we'll go through her tips on what she did in the same week in her exam sitting. Then we'll go through 15 rapid-fire opening Viva stems, followed by a breakdown of how she approached the whole Viva section from the start past the SAQ leading up to the Viva itself. And then finally, we'll finish off with the last 15 opening Viva stems. Hopefully, through that journey, you'll be able to see a little bit of insight on how Maddie tackled the opening Viva stem and how she set herself up for the next 300 seconds of Viva questions. So with that said, good luck to everyone sitting right now, and let's dive straight into it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey Maddie, thanks for jumping on. I really appreciate you spending some time to help potential Viva candidates in the next week.
Hello, no worries. Happy to help.
Look, you're probably the closest person that can relate to the people that are sitting the exam right now. You sat in 2025 first sitting, and the candidates right now are approximately a week away from sitting. Do you remember how you felt in this last week leading up to the exam?
Yeah, gosh, it's funny to think back on it because it feels like such a long time ago. Time starts to really speed up, I found, after it's over. But I do remember, obviously you feel very stressed. I felt a lot of pressure, because you've been working for the better part of the last 18 months by this stage on this exam. And I guess the Viva, we all know it's 50%. So, it is a significant component. I think by this stage I'd done all of the practice Viva nights. So I was at Lismore Hospital. But I am a Gold Coast trainee, so I'd done some practice nights on the Gold Coast, some in Lismore and some at the Ansgar office in Brisbane. And I think after all of those practices, and obviously lots of practice informally at work with bosses and colleagues who were also sitting, by this stage, probably, just over a week out, I think I was finally starting to feel somewhat ready, which is very different to the written. I definitely did not feel ready for that. But I think by this stage, I started to get the same Vivas repeating. And, I'd sort of felt like I'd done as much as I could.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably feel in that boat that as they get closer, they start to feel a bit more confident. And I remember in my week leading up, I would go through these stages where some days I would have real negative energy where I just felt like, oh my God, am I going to be able to do this? And then other days were positive, like, I got this. I just had a vibe that I smashed and absolutely knew everything about. And as the days got closer, I just had to try to make those negative days be less and less frequent and the positive stuff more frequent. When you got to the day, did you ever think that you would end up where you did winning the Renton?
No, I don't think so. Ours was in Melbourne. So I think the whole aspect of having to pack a suitcase, get on a plane, book a hotel, that really added to like the nerves, I think. Whereas the sitting, it's in Brisbane, so that would have been a lot closer for me. I don't think, I mean, I don't know if anyone walks in feeling like they're going to come out on top. You're just hoping to get through. I mean, that's the real goal, isn't it? I think towards the end, I had got a lot of good feedback on my practice vivas, and by this stage we'd done, you know, the courses with colleagues and things, and I maybe felt like I might have a chance at a merit. That was kind of what I was hoping for, but I never really was striving towards anything more than that, because I think that would have put a lot too much pressure on. And definitely flying down to Melbourne and then being in Melbourne, you have those moments of, oh, I'm not ready, I can't do it, you know. I think everyone feels that way a little bit.
Did you have a strategy? Everyone has a different, we all know that perfect diagram of stress versus peak performance. Some people do better with an increased amount of stress for the peak performance. Some people, I know a few colleagues where they're just like, I didn't look at a book for 2 days before I didn't do a Viva. What was the strategy that worked for you? And it might not necessarily work with other people.
No.
But what was the strategy that worked for you?
I think like you said, that's really individual. I know some colleagues who the night before went out for a nice dinner and just watched a movie. I think everyone's very different in what they need to do in that moment. And, you know, we've been studying for the better part of 20 years. We've probably figured it out. So for me, I couldn't do nothing. If I'd sat trying to do nothing, I would have just spiraled into thinking of all the things I may not have revised more recently. So what I did was I went down to Melbourne 2 nights in advance so I could sort of get a little bit settled. And the day before, I walked over to the convention centre and found out exactly where I needed to go. So that kind of took that unknown aspect out of the actual morning of it. And then I definitely didn't study crazily hard. Like before the written, I tried to reread all my notes and I was up till a ridiculous hour of the night. And I think that was an error, because there's no way you can revise it all before it. But I felt like I had to. So I sort of learnt my lesson for the Viva. So for the Viva, I had, I'd made posters, basically A4 posters on most major topics and definitely all diagrams. And they were all over my walls of my room. And I'd copied them. So I had like a portable version of them. So I took them down to the Viva with me and I looked over those. I think I had like a cardio pile, a rest pile, a pharmacology pile, and other pile. And that was a really good thing to sort of look through and just really flash my memory. I also listened to, I think it's Stan and Lahiru's podcast, interviewing Mason, who did a practice Viva, just to kind of listen to really good answers, to get that sort of way of speaking or thinking in my head. And then I looked over things that I thought I hadn't done in a long time and all were likely to come up. For example, IV iron infusions was a new LO for us. I think I looked over some electricity. The other really good thing is in the back of Lachlan Rathie's primary exam orange book, there's something called short and sweet, and they're basically Viva stems. But the good thing is they have like 1-sentence answers printed below them. So anyone, you know, my sister, my mum, anyone can read that and sort of quiz you on it very rapid fire. And it covers quite a lot of relatively important Viva topics from his experience when he was an examiner.
It seems like you had, in hearing you, you definitely had a game plan on how you're going to do it and that you adapted it from when you sat your SAQ. We were talking before we started recording, and we were saying, I was talking to an ex-examiner and he said, in the moment, the person who's doing really well, whether they get a merit or a Renton versus the person who's not doing well, they both feel the exact same way when they come out of the Viva. There's no Viva that you go out and you go, I got to the end of that. Was it the same for you in the moment where you felt, I'm definitely not doing well?
I think definitely we had a quarantine period after our Viva for about 2.5 hours, which felt like a very, very long time. But in that room, I don't feel like I felt better than anyone else felt. We were all sort of talking about it, and, you know, you'd be like, oh, I forgot that to say that, or I said that wrong. You know, I feel like everyone kind of felt similarly. The actual Viva experience, I think, is very examiner dependent. There's lots of different styles of examiners. My first room I found quite encouraging. The feedback I was getting as I was speaking was sort of nods and smiles and I agree. They said quite a bit, or that's right. So that did feel like quite a good station. I walked out of there feeling pretty good. The second room, though, I didn't really get much feedback at all. And contrasting that to the first room, I remember thinking I must be doing badly because they were a lot more sort of closed, which is just a different examining style. So I think it's important to know that before you go in. And just because you're not getting sort of positive feedback doesn't mean you're not doing well. And the one thing that really surprised me was the fact that when the bell rang and you had to move on from the end of each room, I still had questions to go. So one of them, they had just asked me in a temperature station what the perioperative effects of hypothermia were. And I was about to rattle on my list, and then the bell rang. I didn't get to say any of it. Another one, when I was leaving, they asked, "What's in a vial of thio?" It was a pharmacokinetic plasma concentration Viva, and at the end of it, they asked that, and I didn't get to say anything, even though that's one thing you learn. And I asked the examiners at the end, when you go to that feedback sort of thing afterwards, I think they have it on the night after your own Viva.
Like a celebration dinner or something.
Yeah, celebration drinks. I said, "Oh no, I didn't finish it," and they said, "Oh, don't worry, like nobody else got to that question." So I think that surprised me because I thought that was really bad when I didn't finish it. But in reality, I think they have an endless list of questions, or they will just make up stuff. I don't think you're ever going to finish the Viva and they'll just be like, "Okay, we're done."
Yeah.
So you kind of always feel like there's more, I found anyway.
I think that naturally segues really nicely, whether you meant it or not, into what we're going to be talking about today is how do you brush off that feeling of, I don't think I did as well, to then catch up on the next Viva stem, clear your mind. And really that's the focus on today's episode. We're going to go through a few Viva stems from your sitting. We're going to go approximately 30 Viva stems, which is a huge thank you to Maddie already. And Maddie's going to answer some of these Viva stems. We're going to break it down into two parts, where the first time I'm just going to give Maddie around about 15 opening Viva stems. She's going to answer these questions. And then we're going to go through kind of how Maddie goes about answering Viva stems. And it's not so much the answer of Viva stems, but it's really the theory behind it. Because the key to Viva stems, all examiners say it's not supposed to give you a mark. It's supposed to be a simple question that sets the tone. So how do you set the tone, but at the same time, how do you make sure that you say something that's accurate in a short amount of time that doesn't derail your following subsequent 5 minutes that you have with the examiner? So in that second part, after we're done with the first section, we'll go through some of that theory and pick up some of Maddie's tips, and then we'll go through the last 15 questions. Does that sound okay, Maddie?
Yeah, sure. It has been quite a while since I've studied, so I'll do my best.
Yeah, you probably never thought that once you had passed the exam, you'd have to do a mock exam again.
It's amazing. You spend so long getting all this knowledge in, and then it takes so long to get it in, and then it seems just to empty so much quicker. It's really quite unfair.
Well, it's nice to know that you feel the same way that we all feel.
Yeah.
But I always tell people that are now sitting, before we get into this, it's not so much about knowing the minutiae of the details, it's knowing the stuff that is clinically relevant. And the reason why these examiners ask you so many things that you think, oh, why you ask me that? Because all of this comes from a position of safety. And if you remember that they're asking something that is going to be eventually important to you giving safe care to a patient, then everything is justifiable.
Yeah.
And so we've got these first questions, and people can do this at home. This is from the 2025 examiner report. We're going to be going through question from opening stems from 29 down all the way to 63. Some of them are repeat, but we're going to tackle the first half of these now. And Maddie, I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm just going to ask the question, and once you answer it, I'll ask the next one. And then once we've gone through the first 15, we'll then go through some of your tips on how you tackle these questions, and then finish the final 15 off afterwards. So you let me know when you're ready, and I'll give you the first question.
I'm ready.
All right. Your
I
first
suppose.
stem is, what is the safe maximum dose of ropivacaine when performing a nerve block?
So the textbooks quote the maximum dose of ropivacaine should be 3 milligrams per kilogram. So in a 70-kilogram adult, this would be around 210 milligrams. And we can calculate this dose via the percentage. So, for example, if you've got 0.75% ropivacaine, that's 7.5 milligrams per mil. So you just do the calculation, keeping in mind other sources of local anesthetic the patient may be getting, such as surgical site infiltration. We'd have to adjust this.
What is an isomer and how do you classify them?
Okay, so an isomer is a compound that has the same molecular formula but a different structure or arrangement of atoms. They can be broken down into structural isomers, where the atoms are arranged differently, such as chain isomers or position isomers like N-fluorine and iso, or stereoisomers, where they have a different spatial arrangement. And these are the geometric, like a cis trans, or the optical enantiomers, which is commonly seen in local anesthetics.
What are some of the methods available to us to measure blood pressure?
So we can do this by invasive or non-invasive, such as invasive arterial line or a non-invasive cuff, as well as clinical, such as palpating the pulse.
In relation to muscle relaxants, what does the ED95 refer to?
So the ED95 is actually the ED50 for muscle relaxants, and that is the dose at which 50% of the population will have a 95% depression of twitch 1.
What are the determinants of cerebral perfusion pressure?
Cerebral perfusion pressure is the driving pressure for cerebral circulation, and the formula for it is the mean arterial pressure minus the larger of the central venous pressure or the intracranial pressure, where the ICP is acting as a Starling resistor.
What is the dose of thiopentone to induce anesthesia?
This is about 3 to 5 milligrams per kilogram, I believe.
What are the clinical indications for clonidine?
I mainly break it up into cardiovascular and CNS. So for CNS, it can give us an anxiolysis sedation, for example, pre-medication. It can be used to reduce shivering as well as for systemic analgesia. And from a cardiovascular, it's commonly used, it can be used as an antihypertensive, keeping in mind it does have an initial hypotensive spike, as well as for hemodynamic stability.
What is shock?
So shock is a state of circulatory failure resulting in inadequate tissue perfusion to maintain metabolic function, normally associated with hypotension.
Can you define the term functional residual capacity?
So FRC is the resting volume of the lung at the end of a normal tidal volume of expiration. It is the equilibrium between the outward recoil of the chest and the inward pull of the lungs, and it is the expiratory reserve volume plus the residual volume.
What is saturated vapor pressure?
This is the pressure exerted by a vapor molecule when it's in equilibrium with its liquid in a closed container at a specific temperature.
What are the contraindications to administration of succinylmethonium?
So I sort of put contraindications into absolute and relative. Absolute would be serious things like a known anaphylaxis to sux, known malignant or suspected hypothermia, or a known sux apnea, as well as patients at serious risk of hyperkalemia, so patients with upregulation of immature receptors like spinal cord injury or denervation injury. And relative contraindications could be things like raised intracranial or intraocular pressure, such as with a penetrating globe injury, or perhaps at risk of bradycardia, especially pediatric patients.
How is blood delivered to the cardiac muscle?
So cardiac blood flow comes from the sinuses of the valve salve or at the aortic root from the left and the right coronary arteries, the left branching to the LAD and the left circumflex, and the right giving off the sinoatrial node, and then in 80% of cases giving rise to the posterior descending.
Can you name the types of cardiac action potentials?
Yes, so there is the ventricular myocyte potential, or the cardiac myocyte, which is a fast action potential with phases 0 through 4, and then there is the slow or sinoatrial node potential.
What is oral bioavailability?
This is the fractional percentage of a dose reaching the systemic circulation after an oral dose versus an intravenous dose, and it can be calculated by the area of the curve under the curve of the oral dose divided by the area under the curve of the IV dose.
Are there any patients who would not receive dexamethasone? This is a repeat. So
That's similar. I'd say
yeah.
the
Yeah.
hyperkalemic risk, etc.
And so we'll move on to say, what is the intubating dose of dexamethasone?
This was my second room stem. So I said the dose is 1 milligram per kilogram intravenous for an adult, or 2 for a pediatric patient, or if no cannula, it would be 4 milligrams per kilogram IM.
What is an acid?
An acid is, or the Bronsted-Lowry theory of an acid, is a substance that dissociates in solution to give a hydrogen ion.
What is MAC?
This is the minimum alveolar concentration of an inhalational agent required to produce immobility in 50% of healthy 40-year-olds to a standard surgical stimulus in non-premedicated patients at 100% oxygen.
That's halfway.
Okay.
Did that bring up some trauma?
A little bit, yeah. There was two. Actually, all three of my stems were in there, on my door stems. It was the sucks dose, cerebral perfusion pressure, and an acid.
It's funny because we think about when we give vivas, we always have 2 minutes to think. But on the day, like I said, you have 12 stations. It's only 3 stems that actually you have 2 minutes to think. The rest of them you just have to rapidly answer as you get along. Listening to you, what was your kind of, now we can talk about the theory on how you approached answering the stems, because there were some really strong answers that I don't think as you can see why you would have done really well in this exam and won the Renton.
Okay. So when I was preparing for the Vivas, I heard a lot of advice either from colleagues, podcasts, whatever. And a lot of people talked about the concept of like playing the game or like having a strategy in terms of answering the opening stems. And I did hear some conflicting advice. Like some people said, say as little as possible, just answer the question so that they can then direct you to where the most of the marks are, which makes sense. So you don't waste time because 5 minutes is not a lot of time. Other people said, well, if you know more, sometimes maybe if you say more, you might get more marks, or you might give a better first impression. So I kind of struggled with that a fair bit. And actually, right before we had our Viva, they took us upstairs and they sat us down. And I think the deputy chair lady, she came out and she spoke to us and she said, don't worry about strategies, don't worry about games. All you need to do is answer the questions. And it's the examiner's job to ask the right questions to get the right answers from you. So I thought that was a little bit comforting going in. In saying that, I think when you get your 3 door stems, that is the only really chance you have to actually think before you speak. Like you said, the other ones are just, okay, we're going to change topic now. What's this? So I kind of settled on a theory where I would be concise, which is sometimes hard because you've learnt so much about these things, but be concise. But if you can, in a concise way, show you know a little bit more than just the answer. For example, the succinylcholine one, I've given that to a couple of people, and the answer to the question is what was 1 milligram per kilogram IV. But I said, in an adult, it's 1 milligram per kilogram IV. If it's a pediatric patient, you give 2, and then if it's intramuscular, you give 4. So it didn't take a lot of extra time, but it sort of maybe demonstrated a little bit more. Also, in my acid one, instead of just saying it's a substance that dissociates to give a hydrogen ion, I said the Bronsted-Lowry theory of an acid is this. And then they said, oh, well, do you know any other theories of acids you can tell us? And they looked a little bit pleased that they got to ask that. So does that sort of make sense?
It does make sense. And actually, when you're explaining that theory, I can feel myself just revisiting you answering the questions. And I know you said it's not trying to play a game, but when you were answering the opening stems, I was almost in a way excited to ask you the next question. I wanted to actually ask you the question, and I'm like, no, just move on to the next one. And it was a balance. And again, this is not supposed to be replicated in any way, because what works for Maddie might not work for the next person. It also depends on the way you speak, your style, and how natural you make you got to be natural in this environment.
Yeah.
But when you were asking stuff, even when you answered the contraindications to succinylmethonium, when you broke it down to there's some absolute and relative, I could see when you're an examiner, you can go, okay, this person's already answered maybe 3 or 4 things down the line in my head. And I wanted to ask you questions that were subsequent follow-up, but I know I had to move on.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really nice skill that you've said. What can I add to this question without wasting too much time?
Yeah, it is a hard balance sometimes. And sometimes you might not be able to add anything. And I think that's kind of where I kept settling back on my mind as to what the examiner told us. You just have to answer the question. And when you break it down to just that, it's actually quite reassuring because we can do that. Like we spent 18 months answering these questions, you know? And like you said, the opening stem is not supposed to be 5 out of 5 material. It really is to get you talking on the topic.
Yeah.
And I think the stems in the back of Lachlan Rathie's book are quite useful for that too.
Yeah, and obviously having an examiner giving you what the answers are there gives you a kind of a benchmark to be like, this is what I should be aiming for, or at least an insight into an examiner's brain, which is all we're trying to get to. And so in your head, you were saying you were just trying to answer what was ahead of you. Did you ever say, how do I know when to stop? And how do I know where I just want to add a little bit more? Did you have was there like a mental clock in your head that went, I'm actually talking for maybe 15, 20 seconds. I should probably stop now?
Surprisingly not. I thought there probably would be because I do have a tendency to talk too much. I feel like the examiners were really good at guiding that, at guiding the process. I feel like I didn't really get the chance to because they would sort of signal in a way that it was time to move on, not necessarily cut me off. I think they did at some times, and I think that's okay because they're the ones with the marking sheet and they know 80% of the marks are over here. Whereas, you know, when you start a Viva on something, like especially something like tramadol, it could go into pharmacodynamics, isomerism, polygenetics. It could go, you don't know. So I tried to sort of read their body language as well.
Yeah.
And I think just like you said, you know, being natural and being yourself, not trying to be more confident than you are. And if you are unsure, there's nothing wrong with saying that. I think, you know, it's important in your practice, I think, to actually practice a couple of bad Vivas. Like I had a terrible one on gas laws. And it's like all I was saying was, I don't know, you know. But it's important to practice that for 2 reasons, I think. One, so that you can practice moving on. And, okay, that was terrible, but I'm not going to make the rest of them terrible. And also how to practice saying, I don't know, or and there's ways to say that, you know, like I don't quite recall now, but based on first principles, I would think this. Like one of my Vivas was on thiopentone. I'd never even seen thiopentone in real life. They asked me to draw the plasma time curve, and I had no idea what numbers to put on the y-axis. And I said, well, I know what to put for propofol, but I've never used thio, but based on, you know, the pharmacokinetic principles, it would be the dose divided by the volume of distribution. And then they said, okay, what is that? And then that's something you can talk about.
Just another thing that you're adding on, which you touched on, is when you become relaxed in that state, which happens as the Viva goes along, you're able to read that person next to you. I think that's a really important part of when you're trying to do a good Viva, is being able to be comfortable enough where you actually can see what the examiner is trying to get from you. Don't miss those small cues from the examiner. That's the biggest difference, I think, from us novices giving Vivas to the real day. I found it was complete day and night. When someone gives you a Viva that isn't an examiner, i.e. me, we have a very rigid schedule of things that we want to get answered. And if they get answered in the wrong order, I don't know how to recorrect that.
Exactly. They're very, very good at that. And they know like 100 different ways to ask the same Viva.
And
especially the more senior examiners. They, it's amazing how they can ask it different ways.
And if you can just bring your nerves down a little bit to just be in that same level as that examiner, it goes a long way. And so we don't want to make this all about the Vivas per se and how exactly what you did in the situation. Can you take us back into once you set the written
Yeah.
to then getting to the Viva date? What was your kind of game plan preparation to go from, I've got lots of SAQ knowledge, I need to translate that now into verbal Viva knowledge?
Yeah. I think that is a challenging time for several reasons. Like you said, you've been practicing for so long in one medium, which is writing. Changing it to speaking definitely sort of has a shift in the brain that sort of has to happen. And I think it's definitely easier for some people than others. Some people are much more comfortable public speaking based on things they've done in the past or just their intrinsic personality than others. So I think the speaking barrier can be a thing. And then sort of the how do I practice, how do I prepare? So I had a week off after the written, which turned into 2 weeks off because it was so nice. I couldn't go back. And then I just sort of had to start. And I found it really hard to know where to start. There's a lot of really good Viva resource books out there. The ones I like, they're titled the 2021 Physiology, Pharmacology and Equipment books. There's also a really thick book written by Sheridan Frisbee, who's a consultant now. Obviously, she wrote it when she was sitting her exam. So I printed those out and sort of started looking through them. And when I made my flashcards for the FAQ, I sort of, and all my notes, I tried to do it with the Viva in mind because I didn't want to have to go back and, do it all again because it's all the same content. So I guess I just started picking random topics. I think started with like ECG, the equipment of the ECG placement and electrodes and that triangle because that wasn't something I felt very confident on. And I think I just asked someone to give me that Viva in the book and it probably didn't go super well. And then someone actually, a past examiner told me it's not actually the 5 or the 20-minute Viva you do that is the value. It's the study you do after it. So you should, I think, obviously you ease into it, but towards the end, I think you should be trying to do a 20-minute Viva, so 4 lots of 5 every day or every second day at least. And then, putting bookmarks in the book or writing the topics down, and then after work or whenever you get a moment, going back and actually studying whatever the Viva book says, as well as my old notes. And then normally be, 1 or 2 things that was a little bit different in the Viva notes that hadn't made its way into my SAQ notes. Just a different way of thinking about something or asking something. So I sort of jot those extra points down that I sort of felt like I hadn't had in my previous study notes, if that makes sense. And then just to keep on doing that, and I ended up with, I think, 2 of those A5 books filled up with just Viva notes on different topics. I think the Viva nights practice were really good. As you can, I don't think you can do enough like high fidelity practice. So we had Lismore Hospital is very good. They do 4 nights. So we did 4 at Lismore, did 2 at Gold Coast, and I did 2 at Anscar, plus the Viva weekend course that you pay for up at West End. And by the end of all of that, I think I had the liver Viva about 8 times. So it's a repetition as well, because there definitely is Vivas that are commonly asked, either because they lend themselves really well to Vivas or they don't lend themselves well to SAQs.
Yeah.
I did that a lot. I still looked every now and then through my pharmacokinetic tables so I wouldn't forget those numbers. Not that the exact numbers are make or break, but I just wanted to keep it fresh. And I looked through my diagrams that were all over my walls, That's pretty much it. I think I actually, as hard as it was to get into the Viva practice, after a couple of weeks, I was actually enjoying it a lot more because suddenly you're studying with friends. You're not alone in your room like you have been. And the other thing that I thought was really useful is I actually got all the previous ANSCA stems, so they were in the past exam reports, from 2018 to 2024 and put them into like a document and tried to get rid of most of the repeats because there are a lot of repeats. And then my colleague and I each, we'd often do it at work or after work, just on a phone call. We'd get whatever page we were up to. It was a long document, and we just go one after the other, like you, me. We'd just answer the stems. And I think that was really useful because it gave you that practice at going in with a punchy, strong stem. And a lot of them are really doable. They're just definitions or, what is cerebral blood flow. There are a couple of ones that made me sort of stop and think, though, so I was glad I had looked at them.
I think what you're mentioning is a part that I think most people struggle with is after a Viva, going back and breaking down that Viva. Even when you have a good Viva, I think it's important to then go back and review the Viva, because when you have a good Viva, I remember having this happening to me. Like you said, you get liver Vivas often, you get isomers often, you get all these topics that like I know that at my peak knowledge. Take it for granted if you don't go over it again. And then it's not as sharp when you get it and go, oh, wait, I was actually really good at that 2 weeks ago, but now things happened. And I haven't improved what I could have been improving to make it better. So that revisiting of Vivas and making it a collegiate thing with involving your friends to go over Viva stems. So you're getting your gaps fixed out, and then you're also making sure that what you're good at stays good.
Yeah.
Is really key.
And I think by doing it that way too, you get forced revision on everything. And that was something I think I struggled the most with SAQs on. There's that forgetting curve where if you look at it recently, otherwise it goes down. So doing a Viva, and it doesn't have to be the day after. Sometimes you're on night, sometimes it's a really busy week, but I tried to do it within the week. Yeah. And I feel like from doing it and then revising it, somehow it finally started to actually like stay in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think people are listening to this who are not in the stage of Vivaing and are studying and are at the stage of just contemplating how to study or get started on studying, getting ready for the SAQ. That other point that you made of when you're making your notes, because now a lot of people study. We had people on previously talking about how they study with AI. I used to handwrite my every LO. It's important to consider how good your note clarity will be, whatever way you study, to then start to have that for when you start Vivas. Because I was the same as you. When I finished the SAQ, I'm like, how do I start my Vivas studying? I don't know where to start. I just went back to my notes and just started reading my notes. And
pretty much,
and it's that kind of work.
It's all the same stuff. And I remember when I was making my notes, I was probably a bit slower than some of my colleagues were, but I was trying to make like top quality so that I didn't have to do it again.
Yeah.
And it was a whole nother conversation on what you do for the 12 months before, but I didn't actually do any revision until December. So I started in March and didn't do any revision until December. I just focused on getting the notes out in like the best quality that I could, and then revising.
Yeah, and that allows you to then catch up the time that you would have done, because if you make good quality notes, it's easier then to revise because you're not looking for gaps afterwards.
Exactly. So everything that I needed, I knew was there, and then it was obviously an incredibly intense December and January, but I turned all of those, I turned all of my typed notes into A5 flashcards for not all of the notes, but for definitely every SAQ and for a lot of the sort of random points that weren't SAQs, And then those flashcards came everywhere with me. Like they were everything for the rest of it.
So when someone's sitting the exam,
yeah,
they will rock up into theatre and they just have like their notes with them, and you're in the middle of studying, aren't you?
Yeah.
Let's now, if it's okay with you, let's do the last 15. It's kind of been a bit more than 15, but we can already tell in the first 15 there's been a couple of repeats.
Yeah.
We've now gone through how you kind of break down an opening stem, and hopefully now people who are listening at home or wherever will now be able to appreciate how you're answering these 15, the second 15, with this same kind of thought that you had for the first 15. So why is it that Maddie was answering that question of what's the intubated dose of sucks, but not just 1 milligram per kilogram, but what was the theory behind it? And it's not so much that we want people to copy exactly what you're saying, but it's just to approach it in a way that makes it comfortable. Because the last thing you don't want is you to stuff up the opening stem, because I think it then ruins the next 300 seconds of viving. And I think if you do an average stem or a good stem, it makes it easy.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand that question to begin with, it makes it really hard, because then the examiner's got to do a bit of catch up just to make sure that the knowledge that you are presenting them is actually that you have that.
Yeah.
So when you're happy, we'll start off with the next 15 when you're ready.
Yeah, very good.
Okay. So what does the term atelectasis mean?
This is the partial or complete collapse of alveoli, resulting in a reduced ventilation.
What is venous return?
Venous return is the volume of blood per unit time returned to the right atrium. It's coupled to cardiac output, so it's typically 5 litres per minute, and it's given through the equation mean systemic filling pressure minus right atrial pressure divided by the resistance to venous return.
Okay, we have a repeat here. What is an isomer? So we're going to skip that. How does the kidney normally handle glucose?
So any renal substrate, the total excretion equals the filtration minus the reabsorption plus the secretion. So glucose is freely filtered at the glomerulus. There is no secretion, and it is normally 100% reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule via SGLT1 and 2 co-transporters with sodium.
Please draw a plasma concentration. We're going to skip that because it's a drawing. And so we're going to go, what is macro shock?
I will just say, though, it's very important, I think, to talk and draw at the same time. Otherwise, you're really cutting into your time. So I would say, well, the y-axis is this. Normally, they actually give you the axes. And then as you're drawing, so you got a peak and then it descends through half-life or whatever.
Yeah, and then this one, like you've said, that they've said in brackets, axes will be provided. So you kind of already know what you're going to be drawing. But that is a very important point, talk and draw at the same time. What is macro shock?
So this is where an electric current is applied to 2 points of the external body, and it can induce VF at a threshold of 100 milliamps.
What are the contraindications? We've had that one as well, to succinylmethonium. What is normal cerebral blood flow? Variation, but...
Yeah, that's quite different. So cerebral blood flow is the blood flow to the cerebral circulation per unit time. It is 750 millilitres per minute, or 15% of the cardiac output. In weight-based, it's 50 millilitres per 100 gram per minute.
What additives are found in a unit of packed red blood cells?
So this is given by the acronym SAGM. So we have saline to assist with the tonicity and stability of red cells. We have adenine as a source of phosphate or just an energy source for ATP production. We have glucose as a substrate for red blood cell anaerobic glycolysis, and mannitol for also its tonicity and red blood cell membrane stability.
How does sodium get across a cell membrane?
So it can do this via passive and active transport. So sort of passive transport would be through things like ligand-gated sodium channels, like the nicotinic, or voltage-gated sodium channels. And then primary active transport would be the sodium-potassium ATPase. And then secondary active transport would be things like the sodium-calcium co-transporter in cardiac myocytes, or the SGLT2 transporters in the kidney.
This is a long one. Imagine we have two patients, one of whom is 40 weeks pregnant and the other who is not. They are otherwise identical. You are going to give them a spinal anesthetic for lower limb surgery. Which patient gets the larger dose and why?
So I believe this would be the non-pregnant patient, because the pregnant patient has a compressed fecal sac via venous engorgement and adipose tissue, which would result in the local anesthetic spreading higher. So they're at risk of a higher spinal than someone who's not pregnant.
What is intracranial pressure?
This is the pressure exerted against the internal surface of the skull by the contents, including the brain, blood, and CSF, and it's normally about 5 to 15 millimeters of mercury.
What is your choice of antiseptic for a spinal anesthetic?
We typically use chlorhexidine, 0.5% with 70% isopropyl alcohol because it has favorable features such as its fast onset due to rapid drying, as well as having the 24-hour approximately residual action through the substantiativity of chlorhex.
How might lignocaine be administered perioperatively?
There's a variety of ways. It can be topical, like EMLA or oral spray. You can have subcutaneous infiltration. You can have perineural, sort of surrounding for regional blocks. You can have neuraxial, and then finally intravenous.
Perfect. That's it. Done.
Oh, okay.
I think we might have had one more, but as a repeat. So we're all. I'm in amazement because you absolutely smashed that. And you're 4 months down the track from having done this exam, which makes me.
I did read over them. Full disclosure, but yeah.
But still, those answers were really good, and I hope it's not so much the answers it's not so much what you were saying. It was the way you were saying it is what I'm hoping that people listening will get out of it, and why you were saying it that way. So I know we said it's not really about theory, but it's also about how you pick and choose the words to make yourself comfortable.
Yeah.
And that was the whole point of doing this kind of really mean exercise for you. Good for me because all I had to do was just read the question, and hopefully good for the listeners. Is there anything as final kind of advice you want to give to the people listening before their exam next week?
So I've something specific and then general. Something specific I forgot to say earlier was, I think a common stem I think you're very likely to get is something about some organs' blood flow. So cardiac, cerebral, renal, or hepatic are the main ones that come to mind. And I kind of had a little structure in my head for how I'd answer that. So I would say that, because it's normally what is something blood flow or perfusion. I would say, well, it's for example, the one we did on CNS, I would say it's the blood flow to the cerebral circulation per unit time, which is, and then I give the value in per minute. So that's the 750 mils per minute, equaling, and then I give the percent of the cardiac output, so 15% cardiac output. For the CNS one, I would then say the weight base, the 50 mil, because that's what's on all the diagrams. And if there's a major difference, for example, the renal one, I would probably say with, 80% to the cortex, 20% to the medulla, or, grey matter versus white matter if you have time. So I'd say what it is, and then I'd say the actual value in mils per minute, the cardiac output percent, any major differences. And then if there's time and you feel like it's appropriate, you can say the formula.
Yeah, nice.
And that just gives you a really solid structure for those quite common ones.
It didn't seem like it didn't seem like it took extra time. You just
I don't think so. And a lot of the practice vivas I've done and seen, including the one on ANSCA's website on the Learner ANSCA, they've got a thing called Preparing for Success under the primary exam support. The follow-up questions were, is it equal to all parts of the kidney? So I just sort of, over the course of practicing, realized that all of these blood flow questions kind of followed the same opening, which makes it easier to answer lots of different vivas in the sort of same way. In terms of general advice, I think a week out, I think it's important to, do all those things we said, look over things, refresh things, but I got the advice to sort of wind down formal practice vivas probably the weekend before. Hopefully you've done enough by that stage, and getting vivas that you feel like don't go well at that stage is probably not going to help you. It may make you feel bad. I think it's important to try and go in feeling as good as you can keeping in mind you'll probably never go in feeling good, but just, all the things everyone says, which is very cliche, like eating, sleeping, preparing for the trip if you are flying. I think having all that kind of planned so you're not rushing and forgetting shoes, suits, whatever, just have it all planned out. And I think at the end of the day, just remember what the examiner said, in that all you have to do is answer the question and just be yourself. Everyone's got a different style, so comparing yourself to your colleagues is often not productive. And just, I guess, somewhat backing yourself that you have put all that study in and you've done all that you can do, and you're just going to go in and answer the question, I guess.
Yeah, I think those are amazing pieces of advice, and especially backing yourself. I think this exam can sometimes chip away at your own confidence level. And people will like to only pick on the negatives because sometimes it's the hardest thing. And we really struggle to give positive feedback majority of the time. But you've done the work to put yourself in that situation. Go own the exam as hard as there can be.
Yeah.
And just own it for what it is. Just think about that question that's ahead of you and just be in that moment. And everything people say is cliche because it does sound cliche, but it ends up being the most true thing because that's the best advice you do get. And I think people who really do well, regardless if you're sitting this for the first time, if you're repeat sitting, can block out all that stuff and be like, I have done the work. You can ask me stuff. If I might not know it, I might not know everything.
That's okay. You're not supposed to know everything.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I didn't say. I made mistakes, right? And I remember when I was watching Mason's podcast, I think Mason also won the prize. He said, I made errors. Like, you don't have to be perfect. In my one about the time to peak effect of thio, they said, what is it? And I said, it was like 60 seconds. And then they said, well, what about propofol? I said, that's about 60 to 90 seconds. They said, so do you want to rethink your thio answer? Because obviously it should be a little bit shorter. So I said, okay, yeah, it's a bit shorter. And they said, yeah, that's better. In my SAQ too, I wrote the context sensitive half time for Remy was 10 minutes. I wrote, but it's actually 4 minutes, So those little things that you feel like matter heaps.
Yeah.
They don't really. And I think, as hard as it is to back yourself, everyone's going into this Viva has put the work in. They've got a minimum required mark. They've passed the multiple choice. And that's something that, 18 months ago, they probably couldn't have done without all that study.
Yeah.
So you just got to go in and just answer the questions. And as strange as it sounds, try, if possible, almost to enjoy it, because this is your moment to tell everyone how much you've been studying. Whereas, for the most part of the year, you've been sitting solitary in a room with a pen. This is a chance to actually interact with people who appreciate all that effort.
So true. And from my own personal experience, I know that I didn't enjoy the moment as much. And when I sat my part 2, I was sitting my part 2. I was about to sit my second set of anesthetic vivas. I was in my chair, looking around at everyone, nervous as hell. And I just had this aha moment. This might be the last time I have to sit an exam. And I walked in and you could see everyone's nervous. And I'm just like, man, this might be the last time I might have to sit this exam. It's the same as this. And somehow that changed the way that I felt during that exam comparatively to my primary exam. And it's really important to just get yourself in that headspace and have that. And it's just, as crap as it sounds, you put in all the effort, but remember, you're just showing off that effort and you've done all the hard work.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks for coming on. And I'm so sorry I subjected you to potential trauma, but
it's okay.
But I know that the people listening would have really appreciated it. And I don't think there's many kind of resources available that have someone going through this many opening Viva stems with the quality of answers that you gave and the insight that you gave and the time that you put behind the scenes to do this as well. I really appreciate it. And I know that the people listening will also appreciate it. So thank you very much.
No worries. And good luck, everyone.
Good luck, everybody, for the sitting next week, and I'll catch you guys next time on Count to 10.